Remember the complex app that I built recently, the one that you all loved, the one that creates custom GPTs to do exactly what you want? Well, I couldn't have done it without this tool. I knew I needed to reach for the big guns, so to speak. Why? Because from the moment that I realized I'm going to be building a custom app, a complex app, an app that's going to be doing a lot of things, I knew that I needed extra help. I knew that I couldn't have done it using an app builder alone. Now, many people call such tools integration tools or custom backends or managed API tools, but I simply call this tool my secret weapon. And what is this amazing tool that we're talking about? Well, this tool is called BuildShip. And in today's video, I want to show you the power of BuildShip and what makes this tool so special in my eyes. Now, before we get started, I'm going to be doing an extensive deep dive on BuildShip. I'm going to be showing you all my complex workflows. I'm going to be sharing with you some extensive tips and tricks, and that deep dive is going to be available exclusively for my Patreon supporters. And you can learn more about our amazing Patreon community using the link in the description below the video. Now, BuildShip and the company behind it, Roy.io, are awesome sponsors on this channel, which I appreciate very much. But nevertheless, this is my go-to tool anytime I'm building a complex app and I need to create some very complex but still very easy to use workflows. Now, the first thing that you want to do is you want to head over to buildship.app and you want to create your free account. Once you've created your free account, you're going to be on a screen that looks something like this. And in fact, on my left-hand side, I have two workflows. So if I click on this API workflow, you will see that this is a rather complex workflow. There's lots of things happening here. And that really showcases the power and the flexibility of BuildShip. But right now, I want to show you some of the basics of BuildShip so that you can get started right away and start building amazing workflows. So here I have created a brand new workflow. I haven't even started to design it or build it. I simply clicked on this and now I have an untitled workflow. Now, the next thing that I want to do is I want to click here and click on settings and I can rename it. So let's say we want to name it workflow 2 because this is my second workflow. Click save and now this has been renamed. Now, before we begin designing and building our workflows, I want to first show you exactly what workflows are and why they're so important for app development. So here's a quick BuildShip workflow architecture. Okay, so we have the end user here, and this is the user that's interacting with your app. This is the user that you want to use your app, right? So when you're going to be marketing your app, you want these people to come in and start to use your app. And so they're interacting with this app UI layer, okay? And this is exactly what I'm doing right now with BuildShip, right? I'm the end user. I am interacting with this app. And behind this app UI layer, we have something called a logic or a processing layer. Depends on who you ask. And this layer is responsible for everything. It's responsible for making your app behave like an app, okay? Because if we don't have this, if we didn't have this, then we would not have an app. We would simply have a web page with some static text, but essentially a site that doesn't do anything interactive, that doesn't do anything interesting. And so this is where all the interesting things happen. Of course, here we have our backend, and this is where you are storing all your data for the app. So if you need to store some data that you want to be available after the user exits the app, after the user closes the app, then this is typically where you're going to be storing. But we're going to be focusing on this right here because this is where all the magic happens, right? Like I said, this is what makes your app an app. Now, if you're using a tool such as FlutterFlow, which is my favorite no-code builder, you can definitely build your logic in there, right? You can create workflows, you can create app actions, you can create all of these things. But for complex stuff, you definitely want to be using another tool, and you're going to see exactly why I feel that's the case. You're going to see exactly why it makes it so much easier when you're using a specialized tool to do just that. And so instead of having something like FlutterFlow handle your logic, we are going to let BuildShip handle our logic by creating these workflows that are going to be doing something specific. And so here you have your BuildShip workflow that does something specific. Now, in my opinion, one of the ways that BuildShip truly shines is that when you are creating your workflows, you're going to be doing something called a deploy. And when you're deploying a workflow that you have created, you're essentially going to be enabling that workflow to run in the cloud, right? So your workflow is not going to be running on BuildShip server. It's going to be running on Google's cloud architecture. And as a result, you get the scalability and the reliability of Google's managed platform when you're using a tool such as BuildShip. Now, the last thing that's important to understand is that these workflows, they don't run by themselves, right? They need a trigger to get started, right? And so this is this element here. And a trigger could be anything, right? It can be an HTTP request, it can be time, or it can be manual, or it could be a bunch of other things. But we are mostly going to be focused on HTTP triggered workflows. All right, so now that you understand the general architecture of where exactly does a tool such as BuildShip come into play, let's go ahead and jump into BuildShip and start creating our workflows. And while we're going to be doing that, I'm going to be showing you some of the little things that make a relatively complex process very, very simple as well as intuitive. Okay, so here I am back in BuildShip, and we have a couple of workflows here, and this is a new workflow that I've just created. And as soon as you create a workflow, you need to create a trigger. Okay, let's go ahead, click here, and you can decide what kind of trigger that you want. So we have basically 5 options here, right? We have a REST API call, we have a ROI trigger, we have a schedule, we have Stripe webhooks, and we have a Telegram bot, right? So if you take a look at these triggers, you can mentally start to get a picture of what kind of triggers each of these is, right? So this one right here is an API call. This one right here is something else, right? This is another type of trigger. This one right here is more of a time-based trigger, right? This is exactly what I was talking about here. You have API, HTTP, time, manual. And then you have something like Stripe, which is also an API, HTTP-based trigger, and a Telegram bot here, which is also kind of an HTTP API type trigger. So for this specific workflow, we're going to go with the simplest one, right? We're going to click on this REST API call, and we're going to click on add trigger right here. Once we do that, you can see that we have one node here, and this node appears here. And this is very useful because when you have a lot of nodes, like if I have here, I can easily browse them in this little viewer here, as well as drag and drop them and rearrange them, which is going to be very, very useful as you're building your app. So with this one node here, as part of our new workflow, we almost have an app that we can deploy. There's a couple of things that we still need to do. We need to double check what's happening here. Now I can click here and I can change the path of how I want to access this specific workflow. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say workflow 2, and for the method we're going to leave it at get, which is a simpler workflow. And then a little bit later I want to show you another workflow where we're going to be using this post method. So that is all that you really need to do for a very, very simple workflow. And the next thing you want to do is you want to click on ship, and that's going to deploy this workflow to the cloud. And once it's deployed, you're going to get back a URL with which you can access this newly created workflow. So you need to wait a couple of moments. Okay, so it has finished, and now you have a message, workflow successfully deployed. Now this node here is not enough, because right now what's happening is this workflow allows us to receive requests, but it's not doing anything, right? It's not responding with anything. So the next thing that you want to do is you want to click here and you want to click on return, right? This is the simplest workflow. And later on, we're going to be creating more complex workflows, right? But just to get started, just to get a feel for this tool, you can click on return, click add node, and now you can define what kind of value do you want to return with, right? So we're going to come here, we're going to select OK, and I'm going to say hello from BuildShip, okay? So now we have 2 nodes, which is the bare minimum that you need in order to create a functioning workflow, right? Which is your piece of logic. So we have the input, right? This is where it's going to be, waiting for your commands, for your requests. And we have the output, right? This is enough to get started. Now, the next thing you want to do is you want to click on ship. You want to wait a few moments for this workflow to be deployed. And as you can see, workflow successfully deployed, and we can copy this endpoint URL. And now your workflow is living on Google's managed infrastructure, right? So you're getting scalability, you're getting reliability, you're getting everything when you're using a tool such as BuildShip. So we're going to say copy endpoint URL, and then we're going to open a new tab, and then we're going to paste this URL. So when I do that, it says here, hello from BuildShip. Okay, so now we've come full circle. We've created an input, right? This is where we define how one can access this workflow, right? Because if you come back over here and you put workflow 3, you're going to get an error, workflow not found, right? Because it does not exist. This, workflow 3 does not exist. And pretty much anything besides the workflows that you have defined here, they do not exist. So workflow 2 exists, as well as whatever I have defined for this other workflow exists. But if you put anything else, you're going to get an error. As well as you have the output here. So it says here, okay, hello from BuildShip. So this is a very, very simple workflow that we have created. So right now, let me show you a slightly more complex example, and then we're going to jump into some of the truly amazing things that you can do with BuildShip, such as interacting with APIs and a lot of amazing things, as well as connecting it to FlutterFlow. And so I'm going to come here and I'm going to change this to post. So what is the difference between a workflow that has method get and a workflow that has method post? Well, the difference here is that a workflow with method get is very, very simple. It's not doing anything. It's not writing data. It's not making any changes. It's simply responding with something back to you. So it's not making any changes on the back end. With post, on the other hand, these kinds of workflows, they can accept more data, and typically they're going to be doing something behind the scenes, maybe changing a document or maybe issuing another API call or something like that. Typically, when you are, interacting with other API systems, they're going to have get, they're going to have post, they're going to have delete, they're going to have put, patch, a bunch of other things. And the way that you should think about this is that if you are accessing a method such as through get, then you're not going to be modifying any data. You're not going to be creating new accounts. You're not going to be altering existing accounts. You're simply going to be getting data, right? That's the whole purpose. That's the convention that you should be thinking about. Whereas with post, this is where you're creating new accounts. You are doing something that's modifying data. It's a little bit of a more complex flow. Put, on the other hand, is something kind of like post, except you're maybe modifying, one part of an account. Maybe you're modifying the name or the ID, but you're not creating like new data altogether. Whereas delete is kind of self-explanatory. Workflows with a method delete are typically used for deleting various entities. So if you have a user's entity, right, a get might be getting a specific user, post might be creating a new user, put might be altering an existing user, and delete might be deleting a new user. Okay, that is the convention that you want to be sticking to. So we're going to change this to post. And now this workflow expects a body, right? So it's not just expecting a URL, it expects a body. So now if we click on ship, and we deploy it, it's going to change the way we interact with this workflow. So check this out. I'm going to copy this URL. I'm going to go back to my browser tab here. And if I paste this URL, it's an existing URL. We have this workflow, but it's not going to work. We're going to get an error. Check this out. I'm going to say enter, and it's still telling us workflow not found. Make sure you have it deployed with the trigger method set to get and path set to workflow 2. So why are we seeing this method? Well, we have the path correctly, right? We have path as workflow 2, but it's not being set to get, because when you send it from a browser, you're automatically sending in a get request. And remember, we changed this workflow to post. So it's not going to work. It's not going to respond when you're sending your request from a browser. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to do something else. We need to use a client that's going to send a post request. And the client that I like to use is called Rapid API. And this is 100% free app for Macs. So if you like this client and you're using a Mac, you can go ahead and Google it and you can download it. But if you're not using a Mac or you want to use another client, there are tons and tons of clients available. Postman is another one that's available on the web. So you can just simply Google for one, tons and tons of stuff available. And so with this client, I can mimic a request that an application might be making. So an application such as FlutterFlow, right, which is going to be connecting, as you're going to see a little bit later in the video. And so what I can do is I can click over here. I can copy this endpoint and I can paste it in here and I can say post. Okay, so when I select post, I can send in a body. Okay, if I do get, it's not going to send this body. So I can fill in this body, but get request do not send the body. Okay, get request, just send whatever is in the URL. Okay, whereas with post request, I can send extra stuff and this body could be fairly large. Okay, so now we have a post request to here. And this specific workflow is not expecting a body, right? It doesn't need a body, right? All it's going to do is going to reply with hello from build ship. Okay, so now we have post, we have this workflow, and we can simply execute it. And when we execute it, what do we get back? Hello from build ship. You see, we couldn't have executed from a browser because a browser automatically sends a GET request, but by using a specialized tool such as Rapid API, we are able to change the type of request that we're sending. So we've changed it to post, and as a result, we are able to successfully connect and see this response right here. We're not seeing an error. Another thing that we can do is we can respond with JSON. Okay, so remember, if you're building your apps with FlutterFlow, and this is something that I talked in one of the previous videos, you need to make sure that this thing here responds with JSON. If this responds with just text, like what we have here, your FlutterFlow app is not going to be able to parse this data. It needs to see a JSON response. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to click here and we are going to convert it into a JSON, right? And that's very simple. You just put curly braces, put something like response, hello from build ship JSON. Okay, so something like this. And that's all you need to do, right? So now we have a JSON response. And you're going to see this response in Rapid API, but you'll also be able to access this workflow from within FlutterFlow, as we're going to do a little bit later in the video. So now I can click on ship. That's going to compile my workflow, convert it into code, and upload it into Google. So it has successfully deployed. So now we can go back. And as you can see, now we have a JSON response. Now, this is great and all, but unfortunately, our workflow as is not doing anything complex, is not doing anything serious. And so if you want to take this up a notch, you can introduce another node that will let you customize how this workflow behaves even more. And so what we're going to do is we're going to delete this return right here. We're going to click here. And now if you search for empty node, you're going to have this empty node right here. And in fact, if you delete that, this empty node is part of these core nodes, okay? And these are going to be the nodes that you're typically going to be working with the most, okay? So I'm going to click on this empty node right here. I'm going to say add node. And when you initially look at it, you may think to yourself, this is a very, very simple node. It doesn't really do anything interesting. Well, if you click this right here, you will see that you can introduce something called node logic. And this is where you can write custom JavaScript code that can do pretty much anything that you want. You have access to the entire workflow and you can take that data, you can modify it, you can change it around, and you can return anything that you want as a result of some calculation. You can think of this as a custom action or a custom function in FlutterFlow. So if you click on inputs, you can see that this workflow has a specific input, okay? And if you click on outputs, it also has an output here, right? So you can work with all that data and you can kind of get it to do whatever you want. And so as an example, let's say that I want to set a name here and I want this workflow to reply to the user with whatever value is here. So I'm going to put James here, then I'm going to come back here. And as you can see, I have access to this name right here. So what I can do is I can say hello And then I can put the name, right? I can just do something like this. And now it's going to say hello name. That is what it's going to respond with. So we're going to say save, and we're going to click here, and we're going to have this return node, because we always need the return node. Regardless of what you're doing, you're going to be typically ending with this return node. So we're going to say 200 OK. And now check this out. I can go into value. Now, of course, I can type in the value. I can say something like, hey there, or I can click here and I have access to all my nodes previously, right? So remember this node right here, if you come in here, you can see that the input is name and the output is output. And what exactly is the output? Well, the output happens in the node logic, right? This is the output, hello name. The input is name and the output is hello name. So if we go back here, I can click here and I can say, well, this is what I want to display. This is what I want to respond in my workflow. So I can just click here. This is this empty node right here. And I can just click ship, wait for this to deploy. Okay, copy this right here. And now I can rerun my API call. So let's go ahead and do that right now. And now it's responding with hello, James, because it's taking into account the values in this workflow. Now, of course, this does not need to be James. I can take something from a request, right? I have access to the previous node right here, this request. I can, maybe a query, a body, request headers, but right now there's nothing that really I need to access. But if I wanted to access, it's there. But the beauty of this is that I can click here and I can modify it. I can enter some code. I can do whatever I want. I can use Chat GPT to generate this code, which means that I can have code that does, pretty much anything that I want. Another thing that I can do is I can click here and I can use this built-in AI node generation functionality to generate a node that pretty much does anything. So this is what it starts with. I need a node that does something, right? So let's say I need a node that returns with the current time in London. Okay, and now let's go ahead and click generate. Let's go ahead and wait a couple of seconds. And it's probably using ChatGPT under the hood. So you guys can do it using ChatGPT if you want. All right, so it's all done. So now if you click here, you can see that it's the exact same node, right? It's that same empty node, except it has generated a piece of code. In this case, it's just a function, current time London, that just, it's a simple JavaScript function that returns the time. So now if you go into inputs, we don't have any inputs, right? Because this node does not need any inputs. But if you go into outputs, we have current time, which is a string. And that means that we can potentially drag this node right here above this return. And for this empty node, we can click here, variables, and now we can just select this. And that should hopefully display the current time in London right now, right? So let's go ahead and deploy this and let's see if it works. Okay, so there it is. Let's go ahead and reissue that request. Okay, and there's the time in London. Okay, December 1st, 2:56 p.m. in London. And that's absolutely correct. Okay, according to my humble calculations. Okay, now I can also change a couple of things, right? In fact, I can move this empty node here. And I can say something like the time in UK is, and then I can attach the result from that other node, right? So I can come back over here and I can insert a value, right? So I can do something like this. The time in UK is whatever. And now I don't need to do any calculation here. I can just click here. I can go into variables and I want this empty node now. Okay, because that empty node has that whole string. Okay, copy this. In fact, I don't even need to copy it. I already have my app testing right here set with the request. So I'm gonna send the request, and there it is. Hello, the time in UK is etc., etc., etc. And so as you can see, in a couple of minutes, we were able to cobble together a relatively interesting workflow that returns the current time in London. We generated that specific node using AI. And then we use this empty node to attach a little bit of extra text. So instead of, returning the time, we are, prepending some text. We're saying the time in UK is, etc., etc. Now, let me show you a couple of other slightly more advanced tips and tricks when you are working with these kinds of workflows. And then we're going to jump into more interesting modules, more interesting nodes, such as ChatGPT and others. Now, if you take a look at this workflow, we are sending a post request, but we are not sending anything in the body, right? It's an empty request. But with post requests, typically you want to send stuff in the body. That's kind of what they're for, right? With a get request, you're not sending anything, but with a post request, you want to send some data that the system can use maybe to in order maybe to create a new account or change some data. And that's called a side effect. Anytime the system changes the data, either by creating new accounts, deleting accounts, updating accounts, etc., etc. And so let's go ahead and put together a very, very simple body that we're going to be sending in our request. So I have here body selected, I have here text selected, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to say something very, very simple. So I'm going to say name James, and I'm gonna say hobby no code, okay? And maybe something like okay, so something like this. Next thing I like to do is I want to click on JSON to make sure that it's able to parse it correctly, right? If your JSON was not formatted correctly, maybe you forgot a comma or a colon somewhere, you would have got an error message here, okay? But as you can see, it was able to parse it. Everything is correct. So now we have a very, very simple JSON request here. And what's cool about BuildShip is that BuildShip makes it really, really easy to work with JSON requests. So if I head over to this REST API call and I click on this thing right here, I click on edit, I can specify some of the fields in my body that I can access later, right? So what I can do is I can click on request, and I can select body, and I can add the fields that I'm working with. So I can click on this plus button, and if I know that I'm going to be sending name, I'm going to be sending hobby and tool, well, then it makes sense to kind of define this data structure, right? I don't want to just have body because I have more information. I know what I'm dealing with, right? So I'm going to give it a key, and the key is going to be name, hobby, and tool. So I'm going to say name, and the label is going to be name. Okay, then I'm gonna add another one here. This is going to be hobby, and the last one is going to be tool. And I actually use this extensively when I was building these complex workflows in one of my last videos. This makes it super easy, as you're gonna see in a second. So name, hobby, and I'm gonna say tool. Okay, now it's important that the key matches exactly as this key in your JSON, whereas the label could be anything, right? But it needs to be, you know, self-explanatory, all right? So I'm going to click on save. And now let's say I go into here, okay? What I can do is I can click on request, and I can click on this right arrow here. And now I can click on the right arrow for the body, and I can select the exact field, the exact, you know, value that I'm dealing with, right? So if I just want to deal with name, I can select it here. I don't need to parse the body. I don't need to worry about, you know, the JSON and all that. I've defined my JSON request for this API call by clicking on edit and clicking on request. So now I can use it anywhere. This is very, very powerful and saves a lot of time. And so now what I can do is I can say, well, Mr. and then let's say my name. So I can come back over here, value. I can click on request. You don't want to click on request as is. You want to click here. You want to click on body, and then you want to click on name. And now it's going to say, hello, Mr. James. Hopefully that's what's going to happen. We're going to click on ship. Let's go ahead and deploy this. All right. I went ahead and deployed it. And now when we have this request with this body here that we're going to be sending, hopefully we're going to get something like, hello, Mr. James. Let's go ahead and execute this right here. And what do we see? Hello, Mr. James. And you got to admit, if you know your request, then it makes a lot of sense to define it here using these settings, using these fields in the output. That way it makes it super easy to access it down the road, right? Or down the workflow, so to speak. Now, the last thing that I want to show you in this segment of the video is this test functionality that makes it super easy to test your workflow. So if you click here, you can mimic a request. You can mimic the kind of request you're getting. So let's say we don't have anything in the query. We just have the body. And let's say I paste this body. Let's say hypothetically, I am sending this body and this workflow received this body without me having sent it. Essentially, I'm mimicking. I can click on test workflow, and it's going to build and execute it, and there's the response. Okay, very, very simple. Very, very easy. And in fact, this is what I recommend you guys to do. I recommend that you guys test it first before deploying it, because testing is almost instantaneous, whereas deploying takes a little bit of time because you got to package all of this and upload it onto the Google's managed platform. Now, it's important to know the basics, but you're definitely not going to be building any award-winning apps with such simple workflows. Really, the power of this tool lies in all the templates that you can use to gain powerful functionality very, very quickly instead of building it all from scratch. So as an example, let's say I click here and I'm going to have this add node dialog box. And if I scroll down, I have all of these integrations. And this is why, you should be using a tool such as this, because it saves you a ton of time. And you definitely do not want to be debugging your APIs and trying to figure things out if you can avoid it. Okay, so let's say I search for OpenAI and I select OpenAI. And here I have a bunch of operations. And essentially, these are nodes that do a certain thing, right? They execute a certain API call. So for instance, we have OpenAI chat, we have, text generation, text to speech, image, multi-image GPT-4 vision, generate embeddings, GPT-4 vision. I actually made a video about it just recently. You can check it out right there. But one thing that piqued my interest is this multi-image GPT-4 vision, because if you recall in my video, I had to create this complex workflow, this complex action flow in FlutterFlow that had a loop and dealt with a lot of these images. But if I knew about this specific operation, about this specific node here, I could have just used it and would have saved me a ton of time. So let's go ahead and try this out. I'm going to click on edit. And I'm going to delete a bunch of these other nodes that we have created. They were just for illustration purposes, okay? So I'm going to delete them right here. And I'm just going to have this input node and I'm going to have this output node, right? So we have this post right here. And this is where we're going to be posting the images. And now we have these image URLs here. And so I can enter the images here statically, or I can get them from a previous node. It's really, really up to you. And so let's go ahead and try some of the static images first, and then let's go ahead and try a full workflow where we're going to be passing the images via our workflow. All right, so I went ahead and prepared some images that we can use, and you can take a look at this image. These are kind of these abstract art images that I've been using in some of the other apps. I actually had them generated using Stability AI in one of the previous apps, and this is kind of what the images look like. And in fact, GPT-4 Vision can successfully describe these images, right? So we have fashion, we also have fitness here, and we also have tech here as well. So fairly abstract images, and let's see if we can pass multiple of these images with one node to GPT-4 Vision. So I'm going to go ahead and copy these URLs here one by one like this. All right, that looks good. Let's go ahead and exit out. And now all I need is an API key and a question. So the question could be something like describe the image. And for the API key, I can go ahead and get my API key. I'm going to create a new key right here. And this, I'm going to call it for build ship so that I know where I'm using it. Okay, I'm going to copy this key, come back to build ship and paste it in here. And now I want to make sure that my return node will successfully display the result. But first, we need to see what kind of data that we're dealing with, right? It's very, very important to understand the inputs and the outputs, right? So we're going to click here. We have the node logic, okay? And as you can see, it actually has a loop. And this is a loop that I spent some time on when I was actually building this loop in FlutterFlow. So the functionality is very, very similar, except it packs a lot of punch. It's going to save you a ton of time. So if you click on inputs, you can see these are the inputs. And these are the inputs that are displayed here on this node. So when you're configuring this node, you need to specify all of these values. And if you click on output, you will see that this is what we're getting back. So we're getting back a JSON object that's going to be an OpenAI response over here. So now we can click on save. And what we can do is we can go into value and we can delete this old value, click on variables. And now I'm just going to display this object right here. And this is all that we need to do. We're going to be displaying this object because right now we don't really know how to display the actual images. Once we see the object, we will know how to display the actual images. Okay. So I have this object right here. I'm going to click on ship. Okay. So now we can go back and send this. So now when we send this, we're not using the body. So you can send whatever you want on the body. You can skip the body. Doesn't really matter. Remember, we're setting the images statically. We're not getting them dynamically. So I'm going to go ahead and execute this right here. And I probably need to wait a little bit, right? Because we're going to be processing 4 images and it takes a little bit of time to process each of the images. So let's go ahead and wait a few moments. Okay, and there you have it. The images you've provided are abstract and stylized digital artworks. Okay, and there they are. Right? So remember, it took me some time to actually build out this exact functionality in FlutterFlow, right? Because, you know, FlutterFlow supports APIs, it does everything awesome. It's an awesome tool, but this is a more of a specialized tool, right? They give you code that you don't have to write yourself, essentially, right? So there's the list of the images. The first image features a dynamic composition, etc., etc. So this looks sound, right? Fitness equipment, computer technology, you know, very vibrant shapes and colors. This is, you know, this is not random text. This is actually our images. Now, the response that we're dealing with is just text. This is not a JSON response or anything at all. This is simply text. And so if you're sending this request from FlutterFlow, you're going to have an issue, right? Because FlutterFlow expects a JSON response. So what we need to do is we need to format this as a JSON response, which we can do right now. So we can come back here, click here, and we can actually do it as a JSON response. So we can do something like this, images here and here. So something like this, and hopefully that's going to work. And now all of the text is going to be part of a JSON response. So we can come back here, send that again, wait a few moments, and hopefully it's going to be formatted as a JSON response. All right, and there you have it. Okay, it says images, and all of this text is part of a JSON response. Okay, so this is legit, and it's responding with a application JSON, which means that you can come here, click on JSON. You can see that this is all legit. It's formatted properly. This is valid JSON. Now, the next thing that I want to do is I want to pass these images from the request, because if you recall, we are actually setting these images on the workflow. We're not passing them. What I want to do is I want to set these images on the request so that we can send them dynamically. And the last thing that I want to do is I want to connect this workflow to FlutterFlow so that we can pass the images with FlutterFlow. FlutterFlow is going to be passing the images, and we're going to be getting tags back and displaying it in the app. Let's go ahead and do that right now. So first, let's go ahead and make sure that we are getting the images as part of this request. And the first thing that I want to do is I want to come here, edit, and I want to make sure that my request doesn't have name, hobby, and tool, but instead it's going to have a list of images. So I'm going to delete this here, and I'm going to click on plus, and I'm going to say images is the key, and this is going to be images. And now here I'm going to select array. Okay, so now it expects an array, and later on we can reference it in one of the other nodes. I'm going to click on save, and for the image URLs, what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete all this. I'm going to go into variables, request, body, and I'm going to select images. Right, so this is the array that we're going to be passing. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back here, and I'm going to create my own JSON request with those images. So I have these images right here. I'm going to copy them, paste them here, and now I'm going to create a JSON request. So images here, there's my new request consisting of an array of images. So we're passing in images, and this is the array of images. And if you click on JSON, you can see it has properly formatted them, so we know that this is a correct JSON request. And now let's go ahead and deploy our new workflow here. Okay, it has been deployed. Let's go ahead and send this request, and let's see if it works. Okay, it's processing. All right, and there you have it. The images you've provided showcase a dynamic, etc., etc. The final image. So there's a list of images, right? There's 1, there's 2, there's 3, and there's 4 somewhere. Okay, so it's the same list, except this is now formatted as a JSON, which means that we can connect it to our FlutterFlow app. And now I'm going to jump into FlutterFlow, and I want to show you how you can create a FlutterFlow app that connects to this backend workflow that does all the heavy lifting for you. All right, so here I am inside of FlutterFlow. I've just created a brand new app. I haven't even done anything. So let's go ahead and quickly build out this app that executes this API call with the images and shows the response. So we're going to define this API call right here, API call. I'm going to say GPT. And remember, we're going to be connecting to our build ship workflow. We're not going to be connecting to OpenAI directly. And this is our workflow endpoint, workflow tool. You can click here, copy this link, and method is post. So we're going to come back here, post, paste this here, and now we need to send the body and the variables and everything. And for the variables, I'm going to say we need one variable called images, and this is going to be a list of string just to keep things simple at call. And now we're going to go into body. I'm going to create a JSON, and I'm going to say images. And I'm going to drag and drop this right here. Click on format. You don't have any errors. Click on save. Looks good. And once we have defined our API, we can build the UI that executes this API and displays the result. So let's go ahead and back to our pages here, our screens, and let's go ahead and define an app state variable that's going to contain our images. So I'm going to say images, and I'm just going to say string is a list of strings. And here we're going to pass in our images. So I'm going to come back here. So I'm going to come back here, going to copy these images here. Each individual item here is part of this array. Fitness. Okay, there we have it. So now we have an app state variable which contains a list of images. So now we can go back here and let's go ahead and create a button that's going to execute it. So we're trying to do something very, very simple. Okay, go ahead and create a button. This button is going to be wrapped in a row so that we can center it. We're going to center it. Let's go ahead and give it a little bit of padding from the top. And this button is going to say get descriptions. Okay. And once it gets descriptions, we're going to display them below. And this text is going to be in and I'm going to wrap this text in a container. Okay. And I'm going to wrap this container in a column so that we can scroll through it. All right. Let's go ahead and make this column scrollable. Make this container a little bit bigger, something like this. So all of this is going to be filled by the result. Okay, let's give it a little bit of padding from the top. Okay, so this is going to be the response, and we also need a page state variable to show the response. Let's go ahead and add a response. It's going to be text, and this is going to be the response right here. So we're going to set it to response. I'm going to set it to loading. Okay, so that at least it's going to show something, get descriptions, and now we need to do the meat and bones of this app. So we're going to open this up. We're going to have that first action as an API, our only API call, pass in the variable. The variable is going to be images. We're going to get them from app state, list of images here. And now we're going to get back the result, right? And we're just going to get back this text. So we're going to click here. And now we want to set that text to that page state variable. Okay, add an action, page state, update page state. We're going to set it to response, set value, and the value is going to be this action output, and it's going to be just this JSON body. That's it. And we need to make sure we are rebuilding the current page. Otherwise, if we have an error, we can just do something like this information dialog box, API error, and then we're just going to display everything. This is always a good idea. And we're going to click here and raw body text confirm. Okay, so very, very simple. And hopefully it's going to do the trick. Let's go ahead and run this app. All right, so here's the app. Let's go ahead and click this button so that it executes the API call and hopefully displays the results. See if this works. All right, and there you have it. There you have it. These are the images here. This is the first image, the second, the third, etc., etc. Now, of course, we are displaying the whole JSON. Typically, you only want to display this part right here, and I'm just going to leave that as an exercise for the reader. And of course, if you are a member of our Patreon community, you'll be able to view and or clone this app and change it to whatever you want. But most importantly, remember guys, I'm going to be doing a very, very extensive, comprehensive deep dive on build ship. I'm going to be covering some of the things that I did not cover in this video, as well as showing you all my complex workflows and walking with you guys node by node, step by step, workflow by workflow. So you can see all my workflows that I painstakingly created when I was doing that video and creating that app that allows you to create your custom GPTs. I know many of you have expressed interest and wanted to see how I did all that. So I'm going to be doing a very, very comprehensive masterclass over on Patreon in just a couple of days. If you're not a member, definitely consider becoming a member, consider joining so that you can get access to all this amazing content. We're talking about all the apps. We're talking about some amazing Q&As, behind the scenes, some insights, a lot of cool stuff. But most importantly, you're going to be supporting this channel and supporting my work. So if you like what I'm doing, then I would highly appreciate that you guys join our amazing Patreon community and engage with some of the other members. We have an amazing community over there. And so if you guys are interested in leveling up your no-code knowledge, leveling up your no-code game, then joining our amazing community is the right thing to do. So if all of this sounds like it might interest you and provide you with some level of value, then I definitely hope to see you guys inside of our amazing community, as well as for that upcoming build ship deep dive that you guys definitely do not want to miss.